I would like to share with you all some of my thoughts and meditations on the subject of truth. Some months back, years back, I started pondering how to explain to someone what is truth. So I had to do some really deep dive into my emotions and opinions and everything to eliminate it. So I make no claims to have the truth, but I do claim to have the same access to the truth, as every other human being does, and I'm seeking this truth on a daily basis. I want to find the bedrock of truth. My goal here is to present my thoughts without emotion or opinion nor assumptions, however difficult that is. When you are going to build a structure, whether it's how you're going to wire your brain, how you're going to deal with people, the foundation must reach down below the surface of things to something upon which to rest, something that never changes and upon which you can rest assured on. This is the truth that I'm presenting some thoughts on. I am concentrating on completely removing my opinions and emotions. That requires digging down below all of myself, below any justification that I have conceived for any of my decisions in life. I seek the truth that is outside of me. I use the term concentration, which implies a focus that yields a depth. If you are addicted to multitasking, you will never reach any depth of thought. You just keep jumping from one subject to the next. So I implore you to listen patiently. There is an ancient quote. Heard it a long time ago. I thought it made a lot of sense. If a person could concentrate on a problem for 2 minutes, 120 seconds, without experiencing any interruption or distraction, they could rule the whole world. I immediately thought, well, I can do that for 2 minutes. I do that all the time. So I sat down and I started monitoring my thinking in a sense. In other words, I was studying on something and I found that I couldn't go more than 10, 15 seconds at the maximum without my thought shifting to some other subject. I could not maintain my concentration on a problem for more than 10 or 15 seconds. If you're doing better than that, more power to you. It is necessary to take a brief pause for a communication disclaimer in recognition of my inability to convey my thoughts with language written or spoken. We humans, we think mostly by visualization, using our imagination to create an image in our heads based on our thoughts, or listening to other people and their thoughts. Our thoughts create images, and if they go deep enough, as scientific research has demonstrated, they become memories or data stored in the non-conscious level in areas of our brains. This is a subject that I will present more thoughts on in a later video on the subject of the brain, the non-conscious, the conscious, etc. Of our five senses, we trust our physical sight above all else. I'll believe it when I see it. I know you've heard that and probably said it. So let's start with a visual source of input to our thinking. Look at this room full of objects, hundreds of objects that vary in size, shape, and color. As you scan the objects in the room, and they're some of them so weird that they defy definition, but I wanted something very cluttered. So you see a lot of objects in the room. So let's turn off the lighting in the room. What do you see now? Now you're standing in the room with the objects. Are the objects still in the room? But what is missing from the room that was there before? Why can't you see the objects? Light. So let's turn the light back on. Do your eyes see the objects or do they see the light? The reason that I'm bringing this up is because there's always more to reality than what meets the eye. Normally, people will say, well, I see all those objects. Oh, you see the light. Light reflecting off of those objects, the cornea, optical nerve, back to your brain. Your brain perceives these things in the room, so you say you see them. And that's fine. That's the same terminology that I use when I'm talking to people. I'm just emphasizing that you need to go just a little bit deeper than how you normally think if you're going after something as deep as truth. An experiment using two sketchers, people with individual but equal talents with the same directions, the same drawing media, pencil, paper, and give them something to sketch. And this might be what you would come up with. Now remember, they're both sitting in the same position in front of the same objects, and they're sketching. Now the differences are very minor, but I would challenge you that if you looked at either one of these sketches and then walked around the room looking for what these objects are, you would recognize them immediately, even though the perspective is just slightly different. The shading is slightly different, very close to the same, but it is slightly different. And how much of the paper that they used, how large or small they drew the objects, varies. But the differences are so minor that you have to study them to see the differences. So using eyesight to convey something to another person not present to observe for themselves is pretty accurate. I'll believe it when I see it. Now let's complicate it with language. Two individuals of equal writing skill describing the same object. So this is going to be written language. The descriptions are then given to other individuals to draw a sketch based on their written description. So you got two people with equal writing skills, paper, pen, whatever, and then you give them an image to write a description of. What do you think how accurate the written descriptions would be when you actually gave them to someone else, and then they took those written descriptions and then sketched something based on those descriptions? This is pretty close to what you might get. They basically qualify as convertibles with 4 wheels and seats, and a convertible and a grill. 2 headlights. You can see the similarities. So you can see once you put language into it, in this case written language, now you've lost the ability to accurately convey the image that you had in your head when you wrote the description using a written language. These two sketches may resemble, in a sense, the basic idea of a car, but they do not resemble the image that we showed you earlier. Let's further complicate it by making it communication between two people using a spoken language. Let's depend on spoken communication to transfer an image from one imagination to another via words and gestures. Because remember, we all visualize what we're thinking. As we're thinking, we're creating an image in our head. So let's assume that these two individuals are linguistic scholars, having spent their entire adulthood studying the English language. What are the chances of the image in one mind being accurately transferred to the mind of the other person? It is improbable, if not impossible. As a matter of fact, I would contend that if you took 2 of the best English scholars on the face of the earth, sat them down to have a conversation, if you could record what they're thinking in their brains within a few seconds, that there would be a miscomprehension. What one person is thinking didn't build in the other person's head based on the words that they were using. I know you've all experienced this, so this is nothing abstract. Let's consider a historical event that I believe is at the source of this deficiency in language, written, spoken, or otherwise. And I'm going to make a reasonable assumption that every person that ever walked the earth was born of parents, and that all humans could be traced back to one origin with one language and one mode of expression. This historical event has credibility, having been researched by many, mostly archaeologists and anthropologists. But again, this is just my opinion at the primary source of the confusion of languages. But I reiterate, this is my opinion, and if considered an actuality, then there has been no lifting of the curse over languages, confusion of languages, and it's still with us today. Regardless of the origin of multiple languages, the confusion that exists between any two individuals not speaking the same language, much less both speaking the same language, is very real. So let's get back to our subject. So I just went through that whole thing on communication to let you know that I'm well aware that the words that I'm using fall very short at conveying my thoughts, what I see in my head. Give me the benefit of the doubt and try to move the thoughts into something that is in the same direction. So the root of the word truth, I think, is fairly obvious. The root word of truth, of course, is true. And the definition in the dictionary, there's several, in accordance with fact or reality. Well, anybody can say that, right? Accurate, correct, verifiable, literal, veracious. I mean, we can all say that everything that we believe is truth is in accordance with fact or reality. But we're going to try to tear that down here in a minute. So that's one definition for truth. Another is rightly or strictly so called, genuine, authentic, real, actual, proper, veritable, the veritable truth, and bona fide. We've heard all these terms. Another one would be for true is accurate or exact, faithful, precise, realistic, telling it like it is, as it really happened. So you see a lot of subjectivity in here, right? If you drew a sketch of that sports car, you would say, well, it was faithful to what I saw. It's precise based on my sense of dimensions, and it's realistic because I was looking at a real sports car. You could even say, tell it like it is, as it really happened. Now, those last two are more in the area of up to your imagination and your emotions and opinions. But they were still listed in the dictionary. Now let's look at the two terms used for pretty much everything in life, objective and subjective. When you look at the definition, objective language tends to be based on fact, observation, and logical argument. Now, if you left it at that, most people could take anything that was their opinions, judgments, assumptions, and fit it into there. But when you read the second one, subjective, language tends to be based on assumptions, judgments, opinions, rumors, and suspicion. Now you've taken and you have made the truth more relative. So there's objective truth and then there's subjective truth. Absolute versus relativism. So what are these two things? Well, let's take relativism first. This is the doctrine that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, society, or historical context, and are not absolute. Relativism is actually legitimate if you apply it to human knowledge and reasoning. I'm going to leave truth out because that's a misnomer. Morality, relation to culture, society, or historical context. When you think about relativism, words come to mind like anything goes. If it feels good, do it. Judging other people by your own limitations. I used to do that a lot. And then finally one day somebody said something to me that was a hard slap, and I realized I was doing that, judging other people by my own limitations. Another would be no fixed definition for words. Well, what does that word mean? You've heard that in politics. Entitlement without investment. So relativism, you could convince yourself that you're due something from something that you did not invest in, that you're due from vegetables out of the neighbor's garden, but you didn't in any way help the neighbor, but somehow you're entitled to their vegetables. Another is, for me to have more, someone else has to have less. A lot of people think that way, that there's only so much. Therefore, if there's a limited amount of everything, then if I want more, somebody else is going to have to lose and have less. Another one is function follows form. In other words, putting what it looks like in the aesthetics before its actual function or what it does. Another is when people say, well, you started it. If there's a conflict that arises, but if you actually could look at a recording of what happened, you would see that it may not be that way. But that's relativism. It's relative to the moment who started it. You offended me. No one can offend you. You take offense. They may have tried to offend you, but many people are offended by something that was not meant as an offense. They just took offense. And they'll say, well, you offended me. No, that's relativism. You don't know what they did to me. Again, relativism. I have a right to be heard. And that's one that really gets people in trouble because they think that if they have something to say, somebody has to listen to them, whether they want to or not. In other words, like right now, I'm speaking to you if you're listening to this, but I don't have a right to be heard by you. I'm just sharing my thoughts and meditations. You can click stop and we're done. Let me interject something that correlates to relativism. Notice that that term did not really exist until the late 1800s. If you look at this curve, the line's pretty flat, 1800, 1850. There actually are some measurables in that gap that aren't shown here, but they will in the next image. So before you look at this next image that I'm going to pop up, you look at when this relativism started. We'll say it started in the late 1800s, and look at its shape up until now. What other change in history with humans could kind of follow the same curve? And if you think for a minute, you'll probably come up with what I'm going to show you, and that is technology. Now, don't let this graph or chart throw you. They had to fold the graph to not make it, a mile long. So what they did is they folded up the bottom, the first thousands of years. You see, if you look down at the bottom, it says 1,000 years BCE, beginning of the Iron Age. And then you see year zero. And right before the year zero, some in there, you see paper. And then between year 0 and 1,000, you see the first windmills, gunpowder, then roll over past 1,000, glasses, lenses to help you read, printing press, microscope, steam engine. And then this is where the scientific revolution is claimed to have started, is between 15 and 1800. But what this person did with his graph is they had to really compress the past and then emphasize the current from 1800 until now. So you see the inflection point, or rather the rate of change is radically increasing from the 1800s. So you see in the 1800s, photography, telegraph, and then the telephone at 1875. That's the key point I wanted to make. Look from 1875 until now, how technology has changed. And if you go back to this graph, you see a definite correlation between relativism and the increase in technology. And this technology has contributed to human isolation. So rather than sharing ideas face to face, it started to be shared by telegraph and telephone in the 1800s. Whether it was people moving away from each other because of transportation. You see the steam engine down there at the 1800 mark, and then you see the automobile. And the society became more mobile, so families broke up earlier than they would have prior to 1800. Whether it's people moving away from each other or isolating them from each other, not even sitting at the same table. Today, you can see people sitting at the same table, and both of them are looking down at their cell phones. They're not talking to each other. What's even scarier is I've heard that some of them are actually texting each other instead of speaking. We definitely see a correlation between the increase in technology, people isolating themselves from each other, and relativism. Absolute truth is what I'm seeking. And then let everything else be considered out of the absolutes. In other words, let's find the absolute truth and then let everything else be outside of that. If you're going to enjoy life with people, you have no choice but to manipulate your way through relativisms, but remain anchored to the absolutes. So you always have to have an absolute to a firm foundation for your opinions, even your opinions and your emotions. If you don't, then that means the very ground that you're standing on is slippery and constantly moving, which means today something evoked a certain emotion, and tomorrow the exact same thing evoked a different emotion or opinion. If you don't have some absolutes to anchor to, then you are walking on a soft and irregular surface, and it's not going to be comfortable. You're going to have more fear, for one thing. So absolute truth cannot be qualified or diminished in any way. It's total. So you can't take an absolute truth and qualify it because it stands by itself, immutable over time. Also viewed or existing independently and not in relation to other things, not relative or comparative. So in order to get boil something down and come up with at least one absolute truth that you can depend on, that you can stand on, you have to do away with any relative or comparative measures or qualifications. Okay, the truth is outside of humans. So let's begin with the obvious absolutes, physics or physical philosophy. Normally, when we talk about truth, most people I don't think, consider physics a matter of truth or untruth, but it is absolute. So in our example here, this is gravity. A tennis ball is being dropped. If you do this anywhere on the face of the earth, given altitude and atmospheric pressure differences, in other words, if you do this under the same atmospheric conditions, the ball will fall exactly the same anyway on the face of the earth. There are no exceptions. You can't come up with an exception. So it is absolute. So gravity is probably the easiest thing that people can look at and say, well, yeah, I believe that's an absolute truth. Another one, which you observe but maybe not as closely, and that is phase changes. And the simplest phase change that we're all aware of is going from ice to a liquid to a gas. There's a little bit more to it than that, but simply put, ice melts to a liquid, liquid evaporates to a gas, gas can condensate back to a liquid, and a liquid can freeze back into a solid. Now, there's another connecting section over there, sublimation and deposition. Let's not get into that, other than I will say this so you don't feel slighted. If you've ever seen a tray of ice cubes in your freezer that had not been touched for weeks, they shrink down and they will continue to shrink until they're gone. That's called sublimation. They don't melt and then evaporate, they sublimate. And then there's another phase change that's above gas. So you got solid, liquid, gas. Another one that's more energy involved is ionization, which is what neon gas does to make a neon sign light up. It ionizes the gas into ions. If you want to put a measure to prove how absolute, this graph shows exactly, and this is centigrade, not Fahrenheit, at exactly 0 degrees, ice starts absorbing heat, and after some period of time, it turns to water. And then if you heat up water and keep heating it up, when it gets up to 100 degrees centigrade, and I notice the 1 is missing on the 2 zeros, don't worry about it, but 100 degrees centigrade is the boiling point. But notice that you have to keep adding energy to get the water to go from a liquid to a gas, steam. These are called phase changes, and they're referred to as latent energy. Don't try to hold on to this terminology, but I think it's safe to say that we can all look at gravity and the phase change of like water, solid, liquid, gas, ice, etc., as absolutes. Okay, the second law of thermodynamics, and this one's going to take a little bit more ponderance. The second law of thermodynamics, for which there are no exceptions, so it's absolute, it can't be qualified. If you move this from the abstract to the plane and simple, it says that everything goes from order to disorder. Everything goes from order to disorder. Now, you may be wondering what this has to do with thermal energy, thermodynamics. Hang in there. If you make an organized stack of all the building materials required to build a house and leave it in an open field, it will go from order to disorder slowly, without exception, absolute. It will begin to weather, and then pretty soon it dissolves and just becomes a lump on that spot in the ground where all those materials existed. Given that glass from the windows is going to last a little longer, shingles might last a little longer, but here's two perfect examples of a lot of work was put into something. Room in the house with the piano, whoever built the piano, built the furniture and everything. If left unattended, it goes from order to disorder. Same thing with the little house and the truck. You could have sat a brand new truck there in a brand new house, and it would look just like that after a number of years. What does this have to do with thermodynamics or energy? It takes energy to manipulate raw materials into man-made items, and it takes energy to maintain them and Without maintenance, the energy decays. And you may not see the energy in those images that I showed you of the house and the truck in the room, but it took energy to manufacture and situate all of those man-made items. And it takes energy to maintain them, to fight the elements that are absorbing the energy and converting it back to raw energy, and the materials are decaying. So you don't need to comprehend the process of how this takes place. You can see it with your own eyes. Heat up a pan of soup, taste it immediately for temperature and flavor, leave it set for days on your kitchen counter unattended, and watch it decay into something very unattractive. Imagine, now this is an extreme thing to imagine, but consider this scenario to make a point. Imagine that all humans are temporarily removed from the planet. For living things, this would leave plants, animals, and fish, but all humans are gone. What would remain is the absolute truth, not the plants, animals, and fish. I'm leaving them and taking out just the humans for a certain reason. So the truth would remain, because the truth is not in humans. You're not born with it. If you got it from Jimmy or Joni, they weren't born with it. So where do they get what they're telling you? So if you remove all the human beings off the face of the earth, all knowledge and morality in relation to culture, society, or historical context is gone. Look at that carefully. Morality, that's humans. Culture, that's humans. Society, that's humans. History, that's humans. So if you take all the humans away, you've removed all that. The truth remains. So by definition then, relativism only exists in the hearts, brains, and minds of humans. If you remove all humans, then by definition, relativism is gone. So it's simpler to eliminate everything that is not true than it is to start with the truth. Eliminate everything that is not truth, and you are left with the truth. Truth is not something that you're born with. It's not acquired from other humans who are also not born with it. Bottom line is, you cannot depend on truth from other human beings, and that includes me. I have not really told you any truth. I'm pointing in a direction, and I'm saying what truth isn't, but I haven't said what truth is, other than you can't qualify it and it cannot change. We can say there are truths, as in plural, of a truth. So there are many instances where you would say that's a truth. And if you put them all together, you wouldn't say truths, you would say truth. Just like deer and deer, a deer, the deer. The word truth is both singular and plural. That's an interesting concept when you think about it. A truth exists, but they are subject to the truth, the definite article. When you put the in front of something, you're saying that that is the definite article, as in there are books and then there is the book. So you look on my shelf, that's a book, that's a book, that's a book. But if there is a definite article, then it is the book. Our opinions cannot alter the truth. That's another thing. That rules out relativism. If your opinion can change the truth, then that's not the truth. Otherwise, you couldn't change it, because the truth is immutable. However, the truth can alter our opinions. That's really the bottom line. The truth can alter our opinions. Thank you for watching.